This show is a part of the podcast network of the Walled Garden Philosophical Society, an international community of philosophers and seekers dedicated to the pursuit of truth, wisdom, virtue, and the divine, wherever they may be found. To find out more, go to thewalledgarden.com. Hey everybody, welcome to Soul Searching with Seneca. Now, before I dive into this episode, I just want to make a correction. I believe in the first part of these episodes talking about the self-sufficient sage, I made a reference to the Epicureans, suggesting that Seneca was comparing Stoicism to the Epicureans. But thank you very much. I believe it was to Daniel in my Patreon group who pointed out that he was actually comparing the Stoic school to the Cynics, which made a lot more sense in comparison to what I was actually saying before that as well. So that is a correction that I'd like to make there. So if you do listen to that one, or if you have already listened to it, which I highly recommend, then just know that Seneca is comparing the Stoics to the Cynics in terms of their sage versus ours, or the Stoics. And the comparison that he was making, just so that you know what to look for, was basically saying that their sage doesn't even feel their pains, right? But the Stoic sage feels the pains but overcomes them. There's a very big difference. But anyway, today we're going to be finishing off this letter and then hopefully moving on in the next episode to letter number 10. So what that looks like for the future of this series is that we're probably going to be hitting about 500 episodes around that number. So the scope of this project is slowly dawning upon me. But like everything that I feel like I've done in my life, I think that it helps to be kind of ignorant to the full the full extent of a project before you dive into it, because if you knew how much it was going to be, how much work it was going to be, then you might not do it, right? You might start to think, oh, well, maybe it's just going to be too much for me. But I'm very excited to continue this series, whether it takes me a year or whether it takes me 10 years. It's something that is very meaningful to me, really just trying to understand where Seneca was coming from and what his philosophy was. So anyway, nonetheless, let's finish reading these last few verses, because there's some really interesting points that he makes here about the Stoic sage. So he says the following, quote, "You must not think that our school alone can utter noble words. Epicurus himself, the reveller of Stilbo, spoke similar language. Put it down to my credit, though I have already wiped out my debt for the present day. He says, 'Whoever does not regard what he has as most ample wealth is unhappy, though he be a master of the whole world.' Or if the following seems to you a more suitable phrase, for we must try to render the meaning and not the mere words, a man may rule the world and still be unhappy, if he does not feel that he is supremely happy. In order, however, that you may know that these sentiments are universal, suggested of course by nature, you will find in one of the comic poets this verse, 'Unblessed is he who thinks himself unblessed.' For what does your condition matter if it is bad in your own eyes? You may say, what then, if yonder man rich by base means, and yonder man lord of many but slave of more, shall call themselves happy, will their own opinion make them happy? It matters not what one says, but what one feels. Also, not how one feels on a particular day, but how one feels at all times. There is no reason, however, why you should fear that this great privilege will fall into unworthy hands. Only the wise man is pleased with his own. Folly is ever troubled with weariness of itself. Farewell." End quote. All right, so Seneca is presenting some really interesting ideas here to round off his view of the Stoic sage, right? So I'm going to start with the end in mind, and then we'll work our way back through the ideas and find out how he gets there. So basically, he's saying that only the wise person can be truly self-sufficient, meaning he can retreat within to his soul, the supremacy of the soul. He can find that internal flourishing that we seek as Stoics, right? But folly, on the other hand, if you live a life where you're following, silliness and silly ways of thinking, incorrect aims, you might think of them, them, well, there's no end to the bother and the worry that you're going to experience in your life if you judge your own flourishing, or if you place the center of your being upon those external, worldly desires, right? And so basically the way that he gets here, firstly, he starts out by talking about the fact that even if you're the ruler of the entire world, if you don't have that internal flourishing, if you don't have that ability to be self-sufficient and to go within to find the value of yourself and your life, it doesn't mean anything. Like you can still be very, very unhappy, even though you have everything that you could want externally, all of the riches, all of the fame, all of the, people around you, but, you can still be very unhappy. And I mean, that's just true. We all know that. Everybody knows that. And if they don't know it, then it's at least a lesson that they will very soon learn in their lives when they come to a point where they seem to have, reached some sort of external, flourishing in their life, but they don't feel it internally, right? So we don't have to spend much time on that idea, but he makes a very good point there because he repeats the phrase in different wording. And he says that, look, we can just say these things, but we need to understand what they mean. And what that means is that you've got to stop going after those aims in search of that happiness. Now, you can still go after those aims if you want to create a stable household for your family, or if you want to exceed in your job, or if you want to exceed in your career and really make a go of it, right? Yeah, all power to you, great, but don't expect that that's going to bring you that internal flourishing that Seneca is talking about. Now, if we're going by more Aristotelian principles, maybe we would say, and I think it's appropriate to say, that some sort of external flourishing in your life does help your internal world, right? Because ultimately, we are social creatures, and the extent that you can socialize yourself into the community around you and to play a valuable role, you might get some external validation for that and some monetary reward, that sort of thing, and maybe that will add to your flourishing internally, but ultimately it's not going to be the thing that makes all the difference, right? What Seneca is talking about is a different kind of happiness, a different kind of flourishing that comes purely from within. And he takes the idea a little bit deeper. I like that he does this by suggesting, look, if we want to see that this is really a universal idea, we'll look to the poets as well. They're even saying the same idea, right? And he gives this beautiful line from a poem. The author is unknown, I believe. But unblessed is he who thinks himself unblessed. And now we're talking about a real, psychological principle, which is, the root of our suffering is the way that we think and feel about the world, right? It's the way that we perceive the world around us. And if your perceptions are that you are, like in this line from the poem, if your perceptions are that you're kind of like a victim, if you think that you're unblessed, if you think that, you wish you could have had so much more and poor you, of course you're going to feel that way. You're just trapping yourself in a cage by thinking that, right? And so what does it mean that if we believe ourselves or think ourselves to be unblessed, then we are unblessed, right? Like the poem says. What does it mean that we could have everything external in the world that we would want and we can still be unhappy? What it means is that it tells us something very deeply true and useful to know about the human condition, which is the root of our suffering comes back to our perceptions, the way that we perceive and think about the world around us, right? And Seneca makes this point going on, right? So he kind of argues against himself and says, well, what then? If yonder man rich by base means, and yonder man lord of many but slave of more, shall call themselves happy, will their own opinion make them happy? So this is a really important point, right? He's saying, listen, if you just call yourself happy, does that mean that you're going to be happy? Absolutely not. He goes on to say, it matters not what one says, but what one feels. Also, not how one feels on a particular day, but how one feels at all times. Now, this is one of the most important passages that I've read, or little quotes that I've read from Seneca so far, and I've really thought about this because I think that it pertains to this kind of cosmopolitan confidence that the Stoics feel when it comes to their place in the cosmos, right? It goes back to what I was talking about in the first episode of this entire series, where I was trying to make the case that the way that Seneca talks about his place in the world, the way that he talks about his connection with nature, the way that he talks about how he feels about the world around him despite trying circumstances, it's like he has this feeling of being at home within himself and within the world at large, right? And when you have that feeling of being at home, whether you have a whole bunch of external goods or nothing, you can still draw back within and find that center of home right within you. And I think that that's what Seneca's talking about here when he says, it doesn't matter what we say, right? Because that's just the surface level persona of our lives. It doesn't matter what you say about how you feel. What matters is how you truly feel. Do you feel confident as a unique part of this grand system of the cosmos, right? Do you feel as though you are at home within yourself? Do you feel confident in your ability to withstand the trials of life, with that kind of sense that you have what it takes within you to overcome the trials that may face you? That's what really, really matters. And that's a brilliant idea. That's a brilliant idea that you might want to meditate on for quite some time, right? Because the thing that the Stoics often talk about is that when it comes to fortune and fate, right, you might be sitting on top of this pile of gold, right, and think, this is amazing, this is stable, this is a firm foundation, this is mine to keep, and I feel great. But, that false sense of happiness, that false internal flourishing is going to be revealed as soon as that stuff is taken away from you. As soon as everybody comes and grabs that pile of money below you, you're going to be sitting there on top of a rock and you're going to be devastated because you didn't realize that you were sitting on a very, very weak foundation for your internal flourishing. And this is such an important idea. And so he makes another really interesting point here, which I'd like to suggest what I think it means, but I don't know if I fully get it yet, but we'll have a go, right? As we say in Australia, I'll take a crack at it. So he says, there is no reason, however, why you should fear that this privilege will fall into unworthy hands. And then he goes on to say, only the wise man is pleased with his own. Now, here's my interpretation of this, right? It seems that if you truly had an insight into how connected you are to everything in this cosmos, if you truly had that feeling of being at home as though you were a necessary and important part of this whole play that we call life, but that also you had what it was necessary to have within you, the tools within you to face your life with courage and virtue. If you truly felt like that, my sense is that to the extent that you felt like that, you would want to work for the purposes of good. That's my sense. And so what he means here is that if you feel as though you are at home within yourself, and if you feel as though you are connected, and if you feel truly flourishing within, well, that's going to be revealed as false as soon as you go and do something that is unworthy of that feeling, right? And so really what we're talking about is how far does virtue go, right? Like how good could you feel? How connected to the world around you and to your internal world could you feel? How at home could you feel if you really decided to aim at virtue? And I wanted to talk about something in the Bible quickly because, this conversation really reminds me of something I was talking about with my dad last night, right? He was talking about the story of King David and Bathsheba. Now, I'm probably going to butcher this story, so listen, if you're a Bible buff, I'm sorry, I'm going to get it wrong. But so if I'm correct, the story basically goes that King David looks out on the city and he sees the naked Bathsheba on her balcony, right? And he basically lusts after her, right? And he was previously a very good king and walked with God in that sense, right? Was in the favor of God, but he basically sends her husband to the front line of the battle so that he'll get killed, and a whole bunch of stuff goes down so that he can get Bathsheba, right? And the story goes, as far as I know, that God basically goes away from King David, right? So he falls out of favor with God, and he spends the rest of his life trying to get back in favor with God, right? Now, that's a similar idea to kind of what I'm suggesting that Seneca means here when he says that you shouldn't fear that this great privilege will fall into unworthy hands, because, we don't get away with anything. You know that when you are living your life exactly how you believe you should, right? When you're sticking to your principles, when you're doing everything as right as you can do, when you're making progress, morally, whether it's spiritually, whatever it is, you're feeling that internal flourishing starting to happen. If you fall back into those negative habits and start, working for corrupt purposes again, start falling out of that virtuous state, I mean, you feel that. And it does take away from the internal flourishing that you had previously felt. And so what I would suggest we should take away from that is that virtue is a path to internal flourishing. This is what the Stoics figured out, right? Virtue is a path to moral and internal sanity, you might say. And so it really is the path that we want to follow. It's that straight and narrow. How can I do things more right in my life? That's the pathway that's going to lead you, either to becoming the Stoic sage that Seneca is discovering here and talking about here, or it's at least going to lead you to a greater sense of internal flourishing. And a very important point that he makes at the very end of the letter is that folly is ever troubled with weariness of itself. So if you follow this kind of straight, narrow path of virtue, you're going to get that internal flourishing. But if you follow the path of folly, you're always going to be distressed, worried, sick within yourself. You're going to be experiencing internal turmoil. That's what you're going to experience, which is the opposite of flourishing. And so he's giving us, in one sense, a goal to aim at, and also a warning to heed. Right? Which is that if you keep on following these false aims, these corrupt purposes, you're going to keep on corrupting your soul, and you're not going to get away with it. You're just going to constantly be stuck in this cycle of thinking that what you're aiming at is true and worthy. And when you arrive, you're going to very quickly see that it was not what you thought it was. And so, this is good stuff, right? And so if you catch this now, you will experience greater flourishing in the rest of your life. But you've really got to catch this, right? It's not about what we say. It's not about what I'm talking about here. It's about what it all actually means for you in your life, and how it, what it means for the way that you're going to approach the rest of your life. So, look, I hope you've really enjoyed these past few episodes talking about the Stoic sage. I've really enjoyed it, diving into these. Hopefully everything that I say makes sense, and if it doesn't, then I hope that you guys will reach out to me and ask questions or give criticism or feedback, because I'd love to hear from you, whether you think I missed something or whether you think I overstepped the boundaries in some places. But overall, it's good information to know, and I think that it's going to help us to study the rest of Seneca's letters, knowing what he sees as the ultimate Stoic sage. Having a depth of understanding about this particular subject is really going to give us some good tools for future analysis, I guess, of what he's saying. So, and ultimately, analysis, I hate that word in context with what we're doing here, because we're not just analyzing it, we're practicing it. We're trying to bring it into our lives. So let me put that on as a caveat. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will talk to you in the next episode when we start with letter 10.